Europe's in meltdown, and it's not even the month of June yet. A not-so-merry month of May as record highs explode under a heat dome that's drifted north from the Sahara Desert after the frying pan of an energy crisis, the fire of a heat wave, forcing a reset by the same politicians who pandered to those who complained about the cost and red tape of recent energy transition policies. Enter Emmanuel Macron. France's president was precisely one of those politicians who'd segged from summits to make the planet great again to cuts in subsidies for homeowners and moratoriums on going green. Now, flanked by captains of industry, Macron on Tuesday unveiling plans to turbocharge what almost sounds like the electrification of, well, everything. We'll hear about heat pumps, charging stations, electric vehicle factories here in the land of nuclear power. More broadly, can industry and technology come to the rescue of humanity? If blocking the Strait of Hormuz is all it takes to threaten livelihoods the world over, it's worth asking about the sustainability of the alternative, an alternative that features a scramble for copper, cobalt, uranium, and whatever else can be extracted in the name of growth. Today in the France 24 debate, we're asking what to do when it's May and it's hotter than July. The title of his new book in French, a play on words that roughly translates as talking about climate without spoiling the atmosphere. Is that pretty much
that's
right?
a French translation.
François Gémen, professor at the HEC Business School. Previously, you were the lead writer on the 2023 edition of the IPCC's UN Climate Science Report. Thanks for being with us.
Pleasure.
Thanks as well to Anna Créti, director of the Climate Economics Chair at Paris Dauphine University. Good to see you. He is an energy analyst with the Sapiens Institute think tank.
No more Sapiens Institute.
No more?
I joined the think tank, the Millénaire, you remember?
Okay, the Millénaire think tank. Yeah. Thanks for the correction. Apologies for that. No
problem.
The Millénaire think tank, Philippe Charles, and from Hamburg in Germany, Stéphane Écoute, professor of sociology at the University of Hamburg. In a piece that you co-authored for Le Grand Continent, you argue that the climate crisis has become a crisis of democracy. We'll perhaps ask you a bit about that later. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
You can, by the way, always listen. That's right, listen to the France 24 debate wherever podcasts are streamed. Yeah, Dateline, Santarém, Portugal. That's northeast of the capital. The mercury this Wednesday surging to 39 degrees Celsius. Elsewhere, the heat and high winds raising the risk of very early season wildfires in Portugal. Over in Lisbon, well, the tourists taking drastic measures with pina colada consumption starting long before noon.
So hot, it's absolutely boiling. So no, it's uncharacteristic at this time of year.
You are enjoying the pina colada, of course.
Very at 11 o'clock in the morning, yes.
All right, not sure that pina colada is the answer to the heat, but François Gémen, should we be surprised at these temperatures in the month of May?
Yes and no, because, if we are realistic, this is exactly what the climate scenarios, those of the IPCC and of other scientific bodies, had predicted. I think it's a bit surprising that this comes so early, but we knew already that one of the key impacts of climate change in Europe would be to make heat waves more intense, more frequent, and also earlier in the year, and also later in the year. We might get one in September or in October.
Might get one in September or October. Now, of course, also the news today is Paris and its surroundings added to the list of French départements that are under a code orange heat warning. That's one step up from yellow. A heat wave in May doesn't mean, by the way, that necessarily that they'll be off the chart temperatures all summer. But as you heard François Gémen say, it could be erratic. It's alarming to see the variation. This is compared to what's been the national average over the years. That's the line you see in white. The heat is on, particularly for those who have to work. Brian Quinn's report starts in Paris's 3rd arrondissement.
In this French bakery, temperatures have climbed over 30 degrees Celsius. Workers prepare dough and shape loaves in the stifling heat. But working the oven is by far the most challenging task. The bakery owner has reworked schedules, hoping to take some of the burden off his employees.
We tried to start working earlier in the morning to have as little work as possible in the afternoon. We've also reduced production a little, so we have a bit less variety.
But even upstairs, the staff is having trouble managing.
The heat from the oven rises. There's no ventilation, no AC. Yes, we're suffering. It's too much. I get headaches and get very tired.
To protect workers in heat waves, French employers are required to adapt work conditions and hours, as well as provide drinking water and protective equipment. Life-saving measures welcomed by roofers, construction workers, and delivery drivers across the country. Here in Bordeaux, this construction site is taking the maximum precautions.
They gave us 1 liter water bottles. There's 100 stations where we can fill them up. We start at 6:30 and finish at 2:15 with 20-minute breaks.
And this server adapts the best she can while waiting on her tables.
Instead of blouses, we're in t-shirts to deal with the heat. But we'll get through it. We have fans running, and anyway, there's no other option.
According to a recent UN study, when temperatures climb above 32 degrees, worker productivity drops by 40%.
So t-shirts instead of blouses, Anna Créti, that's all you can do, adapt to the new normal? And by the way, we see Bordeaux where the heat is high. It's high in places like Brittany where they're not used to this kind of temperatures.
This is part of the negative records that we are accumulating over the last years. And regularly we are caught up by the reality that is saying this kind of events will become part of our lives. But then is adaptation just giving more drinking water or smoothing the conditions, the working conditions? By visual inspections, also the places, the bakery that we were looking at, it doesn't seem something that is in compliance with energy efficiency, which is one of the way also to protect all along the year the places with a good insulation and good also circulation of air and possibly also air conditioning.
Air conditioning in a bakery?
It is possible to play with the hot air and the cold air, which is one of the ways to decrease the average temperature. But it is a way also to understand how we can intervene in buildings in order to have conditions stable over the year and to be protected really in a robust way, which is not just a patch when the high temperatures intervene.
So build a better boulangerie. That's the answer, Philippe Charles?
Yes, I think that more generally, adaptation to climate is today the poor side of, I would say, global warming. We inject practically 95% of the money in decarbonation and only 5% in adaptation. We know that both are absolutely necessary, but I think that as attenuation is relatively slow, we will discuss after, especially with respect to electrification, which is absolutely necessary but relatively slow. We have absolutely to inject much more money in adaptation. I will give you, for instance, today I saw that the temperature in Bois de Vincennes was 6 degrees lower than in central Paris because it means that concrete, bricks, and bitumen is really the worst things to do with respect to climate. And so vegetalization, for instance, is a great and simple idea, but it takes time. And each time we discover a phenomenon that is now very well known, and unfortunately, there is no sufficient adaptation plan from my point of view.
All right, so before we talk about this electrification plans, Stéphane Écoute, do you agree with Philippe Charles? Spend more on adaptation, less on decarbonation if you want to have an impact immediately?
I mean, as far as I understood what was said, it's not to spend less on one and more on the other, but to spend more on adaptation. And I couldn't agree more on that point. What we're entering in is really a zone that was predicted to a large degree by the climate models, but that is also at the same time now feeling very new. So we don't know exactly where, which events will strike first. We don't know exactly what measures help in what circumstances. So we have to plan, but at the same time, we have to get used to this new climate condition by building technical supports like heating or cooling, but also, for example, by thinking about how to build agricultures that are adapted to this changing climate. And this is why we think we should really think about it as a mutation, as something that is at the same time englobing, at the same time concerning adaptation, the way that our societies are built materially, but also the transformation side. So the way that we transform our economies in order to become climate neutral. So these two go together, and I think it's very important to think them together.
All right, let's talk about transforming. The answer for France's president to go electric. Thousands of firms, big and small, roped in on Tuesday by President Macron to help double electricity's share to 60% of the country's energy mix by 2030. Luc Shrego has that story.
For Emmanuel Macron, industrial partners are vital for France's decarbonisation. The French president announced a series of investments into electrification on Tuesday, starting with carmaker Stellantis.
Stellantis and Mulhouse is set to invest over €1 billion in new funding to produce new generations of electric vehicles from 2029 onwards. This represents a commitment to this strategy, producing electric vehicles in France and introducing new models.
The French government unveiled a roadmap towards lessening France's reliance on fossil fuels earlier this year, seeking to majorly boost the use of electricity by the middle of next decade. With French manufacturers expected to produce 400,000 electric vehicles by next year and 1 million by 2030, Macron also announced that France was aiming to deploy a total of 400,000 charging sites on the same timeline. State energy company EDF is also involved, announcing an initial investment of €240 million to help industrial sites make the electricity transition, as well as help homes to purchase versatile yet pricey heat pumps, which come with average installation costs of €15,000.
The French people will choose, and I believe that we must trust them, because it's good for purchasing power, it's good for competitiveness, and it's good for the country's independence.
France is doing better than many countries when it comes to energy prices thanks to its expansive network of nuclear reactors. With the war in Iran about to spill into its 4th month, fuel costs have rarely been higher.
So, François Gémen, these announcements made Tuesday at a time when France's state coffers are empty. Emmanuel Macron making big announcements, roping in the private sector. Your thoughts on what you saw? Were you pleased with what you heard?
Yes, well done. I think this is very good news. This is not just very good news for the climate, but also very good news for the industry, very good news for the country. It's good news for the climate because obviously France's electricity mix is already very low carbon, is almost zero carbon, and therefore the more we will develop electrification for cars, for industry, for housing and for heating, the better for the climate. It is also good, obviously, for the industry and for the economy. And what is striking is that the reason why Emmanuel Macron announced this right now is not because of the heat wave in France, it's because of the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. It's because everyone realizes that depending on fossil fuels also harms the competitiveness of companies, is also a massive geopolitical Achilles heel. And therefore, the electrification plan is also a plan for sovereignty and competitiveness. And yes, on top of that, it's good for the climate. But I think it's interesting to see how the priority has shifted. We're doing this not only for the climate, but also for the immediate benefits that the economy and the country will be able to seize.
Okay, let's talk politics about this. You heard Emmanuel Macron use the word sovereignty in that report. But of course...
Purchasing power, competitiveness.
Yeah.
That is the very same argument that were the key reasons for the backlash. we reduced the ambition on the energy transition because we thought we had other priorities, the purchasing power, the geopolitical tension, and we thought, well, the Green Deal and all of that, we'll do that later. But now we realize, with the current geopolitical situation, that those same reasons that made us lower our ambitions are the very reasons why we should accelerate.
But if the future is now, that means doing business with those who do it best. And we saw it with the announcement last week by Stellantis of a new car factory in Brittany, which is going to be in partnership with China's Dongfeng.
Yes. I mean, we will need to build partnerships with China. Today, China is the leader of the energy transition worldwide. I mean, for every euro spent on the energy transition worldwide, there are 2 euros that are spent in China. This is literally staggering. And I think the key is indeed to build not just partnerships, not just with China, but also with India, with Mexico, with Indonesia, with the emerging countries that will be the heavyweights of the economy of tomorrow.
Philippe Chalez, you agree? You have to make partnerships where you can.
I agree with what François was saying. First of all, I think what is quite important is to know that energy transition is not really fossil fuel to electricity. It's fossil fuel usage to electricity usage. So it means that very often we see the transition as a transition from fossil fuel to electricity. But what supports this transition is above all the equipment which use electricity, so electric car, heat pumps, and so on. And this is what is relatively complex because I would say that, unfortunately, electrical usage are less convenient than fossil usage and also more expensive currently. And agree also with François Gémen that the key problem today is that most of the electricity equipment are manufactured in China, and I'm afraid that unfortunately we will not recover the difference between Europe and China. Extremely difficult, depending on the efficiency of China, which has relatively 15 years in advance with respect to Europe.
So despite this talk of homegrown industry at that press conference on Tuesday, is it just a case of trading in dependency on Mideast oil and gas for Chinese electrical rare minerals and know-how in the EV sector and other places?
I agree on the arguments that have been discussed, but I would like to introduce a nuance. This plan is about the supply side, so building ahead of demand, creating new industrial opportunities, possibly creating joint ventures and partnership with those who have a strong cost advantage in these technologies. But at the end of the day, who is going to buy electric cars, heat pumps, and PV? It's the demand, it's people, is, as you say, PMIs, and the question is, will the demand really follow? What we have observed so far is that there are important barriers to shift also to this new paradigm. These are related to the cost of the investment. Today to buy a heat pump for a medium-sized household is something that is, quite important. 20,000 euros. We have to explain the advantage that is going to be long-term. The same comes with electric vehicles. So the question is also how to include in the narrative the demand side and people who is going to change their usage. And the second thing is we have also to understand what we need in our economies, whether it's just replacing one car that is with diesel with one car which is electric, or generally understanding where consumption is going to. Maybe we can do also something a little bit of sufficiency or sobriety which is, I think, still something useful.
That's the tricky bit about capitalism, is you can't tell people what to buy.
Exactly. When and how much it is going to cost, and which are the advantages. I think that when we have made the first wave of electrification, that was after the Second War, when we have created the networks, the overview was very different. But today we have to explain more which are the advantages in the long term, and to understand what we can do and what we can give up.
All right. So, yeah, and by the way, you heard Anacredi mention, not everyone's always enthralled with electric. On Tuesday, shares in Ferrari dropped more than 5% after the Italian luxury car maker introduced the Luce, that's light in Italian, its new €550,000 electric model. And even though the model was presented to none other than the Pope himself, motorheads failing to see the light with the Luce. They don't like the design. They're not convinced by an electric model. Stéphane, écoute, that surely will resonate for many viewers in Germany where you are, where the far-right AfD has made inroads by warning voters, they're going to take away your cars. They're going to force you to change your boiler. It's been a winning argument for the far right.
Yes, I think the climate question, through this question of cars, through the question of renewables, through the question of coal also before, has really come to the fore, come to the center of the political debate in Germany as in other countries, by the way. We remember Donald Trump, who came to power with the slogan, drill, 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 and who promised to bring back coal. So these questions are really touching the heart of our industrial economies. In Germany, that's cars. In France also, partly in Germany, it was coal. The coal phase out is decided, but now, who knows, might be put into question again because of this general tendency that we're seeing, because of this vibe shift, because of this backlash. But in general, what we have been seeing over the last years has been a steady move in Germany, as in other countries, towards electrification, towards renewables, etc. What we have not seen, and that is really one of the big problems, is a decisive industrial policy that would support German industrial.
So do you think, Stéphane, that both the French and the Germans lack the know-how for what's at stake? You talk about the need not for a transition, but a transformation.
Yeah, I think if we have believed in Europe that we can leave this transformation to the markets, that we just need some technologies and then we can import them from China if they're cheaper. And that's what happened in 2010, 2011, when Europe had a very strong renewables industry and decided to sacrifice it in order to import a low-cost Chinese solar PV, for example. So we really have to combine what China does good on this side is to combine a policy of internal demand with a policy of industrial support by the state through infrastructures, through programs, through also money that is given to through loans, through local governments, etc., that encourage production in certain areas. And I think this is very important because if we think a bit of it not as a transition, but as a transformation, then we have to think of the popular support of this change, which has to be renewed at every instance. And if we lose jobs in Europe because of this transition, then it will backfire.
So need for heavier subsidies. There's on this point, we didn't hear that much in Tuesday's announcement, François Gémen.
And clearly, without state subsidies, for example, most of the Chinese companies producing the equipment necessary for electrification would go bankrupt. I mean, the solar panel industry in China is heavily subsidized by the Chinese government. So the key question, I think, in Europe is, are we willing to support our industries that are active in strategic sectors, in innovation, in decarbonization, and potentially also with regard to the defense industry, which is also, of course, a strategic priority to Europe. What kind of support can those industries count on? The problem is that governments' pockets are empty at the moment, which is one of the reasons why I think we need to mobilize private savings as well to support those industries and to convince people to invest in European companies. We have 35 trillion euros in savings in Europe. About 1/3 of those savings are currently funding the US economy rather than the European economy.
So how do you bring that money back, Philippe Chalez?
I think that you have really two leverage to encourage and to provoke the electrification. The first one is effectively subsidizing equipment. And the second, and I most encourage that one, is that the price of electricity is much, much lower than the price of oil and gas. Today, the price of oil and gas. It's interesting to know that contrarily that's what we think, the price of oil today is not so expensive. When you applied the inflation from the 60s to now to oil, you arrive to €2 per liter.
Sure.
So it means that oil is not so expensive.
And when you compare with the 1973 oil shock, I mean, the price of oil has literally skyrocketed, which is not the case right now.
And so, from my point of view, the best leverage, of course, I'm liberal, but the best leverage to encourage the electrification is not to fund the equipment, but to lower the price of electricity and to inject. I dream about a kilowatt hour at some things between 10 and 15 cents.
Okay, but let me ask
cents of euro.
Let me ask Stéphane Écoute on this. If the price of electricity is lower, well, people are just going to leave the light on more, right? How do you get people to conserve energy? Because again, there's limited resources on this planet.
Yeah, I think lowering the price of electricity not only does not address the problem of creating an industrial base at home, which we need, it also, of course, creates an incentive for people to use more energy. And we know that we are not only in a climate crisis, but we are in a planetary crisis in which several other planetary boundaries are crossed. We know that plastic pollution is a problem. We know that ocean acidification is a problem. We know that we construct too much cement, etc. So there is not only a question of decarbonizing our economies, which is the most important challenge of our times, I think, but we also have to think of all the other planetary crises and not to worsen these other planetary crises. So I think lowering the price of energy in general today is the wrong signal. I would think that we have to make the comparative price of electricity compared to other forms of energy much lower, but probably that does not mean that we lower the price of electricity, but that other forms of energy consumption have to be more expensive or have to be some way directed by regulation in order that we consume less of these other forms of energy and more of electricity.
So, Anna Katie, how do you do it in a way, and we had this discussion just a couple of weeks ago when it came to the price at the pump. How do you do it in a way that helps the planet, doesn't mean that people start wasting their energy, but doesn't punish the poor? Because right now, the argument's being made that a lot of these subsidies help the richest, not the poorest. So how do you do it?
Now, it is true that the equation is difficult to solve because with typically the price incentive, we want to match several objectives, which is consuming less, consuming better, and consuming decarbonized. And it is true that when we push to subsidize or to decrease the final prices, we have to take into account which is the rebound effect, how people is going to consume. And this argument, I mean, in this sense, the French position of resisting to the temptation of giving, very generous subsidies for the gasoline is exactly this point, because this is going to benefit everyone and not the ones that are the most exposed to the energy bills. So we
This
have
is
to
this
manage.
this is the land of the yellow vests, which started because of a carbon tax.
Yeah, the yellow vest, what we are witnessing today is an increase of the gasoline price, which is due to the increase of the oil price, whereas the yellow vest were contesting something that was another elephant in the room, that is, we have to cite it, CO2 prices, so the price of the pollution externality that still exists. And I think that this is another driver that we have to accept. And I understand this point that we have to make the good comparative prices between what it is polluting and what it is not. In France, we have this paradox of comparing gas prices and electricity prices, but what is going to bridge, and one of the essential points of solving this equation, is exactly making apparent to the eyes of consumers which are the damages, and this can be done by carbon pricing.
Carbon pricing, or I heard one argument made, François Gémen, which was simply don't lower the price of electricity, don't put moratoriums on oil and gas. Again, this is to help the poorest, but rather just give money to those who need it most. That's the only way, and keep the prices high on energy, because you can't let people waste energy.
I think we will all agree that we shouldn't waste energy, but one of the key issues we have in France and in many other countries is that the tax policy on electricity is the same as it is on gas, which means that you cannot differentiate electricity and gas. And yet, obviously, the climate impact of the consumption of electricity and of gas in France is completely different because of the decarbonized electricity mix. So we need to face this issue of tax policies. And yes, we also need to consider the effect that climate policies will have on the poorest. And I think one of the reasons that justified the current backlash against ecological policies is the feeling, the impression that a lot of those policies were unfair or were perceived as inequitable. And indeed, they sometimes gave the impression that they'd be designed in Parisian apartments by people who had no car and people who had plenty of money to go to buy local groceries, without taking into consideration the fact that people outside the cities were dependent on their car, they couldn't afford a heat pump or to renovate their home. And I think this distributive element is absolutely key if we want to succeed with the climate and energy transition.
What is certain is that this demand for electricity keeps growing, not just here in Europe, but the world over. And there's pushback, particularly as we see the rise of data centers in places like the United States, but also like in South Africa, a nation already prone to power outages. Residents of the Guletu township outside Cape Town worrying about plans to massively scale up data centers there. The Daily Maverick newspaper reports that 4 new major data centers are set to gobble up the equivalent of more than 1/3 of current electricity supply in the Cape Town area. So, there's, do you regulate who gets that electricity, Philippe Charles?
So first of all, you have to know that, especially in Europe, the electricity consumption has decreased drastically for around 10 years. The consumption of electricity in France in 2025 was the consumption of electricity of 2005. So it means that currently we don't see really the electricity demand increasing in France for 3 reasons. The electricity of usage is much more slower than we imagined at the beginning. Secondly, the equipment are less demanding of electricity because more efficient. And the third reason is that people, because the price of electricity has strongly increased, are probably more regarding to consuming electricity. You agree that if there is an increase of electricity consumption over the next 10 years, which is not demonstrated because RTE plan to
That's
around...
the grid operator.
Yeah, the grid operator in France, plan of around 1% of increase per year, which is not a lot. So it means in 10 years, we would recover the 10% which we have lost over the last 10 years, which means that today we produce too much electricity. And so the big question is effectively the data center. The big demand could come from intelligence, artificial intelligence and data center, and also we hope from electricity of usage, but it's not demonstrated. So it means that knowing exactly what will be the demand of electricity in 10 years is extremely difficult. And there was a big revision of RTE on consumption by decreasing around by 100 terawatt hours the electricity consumption of 2035.
Okay, so
you need to say what RTE is, because
RTE,
our viewers
the power grid, the French power grid, as we were saying earlier.
I have no other word to...
Anna Credi, Europe, not just France, because France has, again, all those nuclear power plants, but all of Europe, does it have an electricity problem? Is there a problem with does it have plenty of supply?
I think that there is kind of, state by state, we can find some specificities, and this is also something difficult in Europe because we have to streamline a unique policy that has to then take into account different histories, different energy mixes, and different visions. So it is an asset for France to produce a lot of electricity, more than what it is consumed in France, because it can provide maybe a bridge for other countries by exporting it, where the electricity production is lower. And between the neighbors of France, this is often the case. Except the crisis in 2022, the neighboring countries have resorbed what it has been produced as a surplus with respect to the local consumption. But then the challenges that we have in forecasting electricity demand in France is more or less the same in other countries.
How much is AI going to, suck out of the grid?
It
depends
15,
on the
15% of export around the maximum
depends on
export from
the,
France to neighboring country today is 90 terawatt hours around.
There are some scenarios,
and we are really at the
maximum.
Maximum.
But there are different scenarios, and the main thing is that are these data centers going to be, to invest in France? We had couple of weeks ago, the first signal of Amazon coming and creating a very big center, bringing a lot of their logistics in France. And one of the reasons was to have, together with the management of their clouds, the possibility of getting decarbonized and low-cost electricity. But this is just one of the wave that we are expecting. And there is also another difference that I would like to point out with the example that has been done with the electrification in Cape Town. The situation in the global south is completely different. Those are countries where maybe not in South Africa, but more generally in Africa, we struggle with electricity access first. And then what it is the usage of data centers that locate there because they have exceptional conditions to also build their factories, bring money, bring in jobs, and then absorbing also investment for electricity. So I don't think we can compare what is going on in Europe and what is going on in these emerging countries.
Again, François Gemène, should there be rules on who has priority when it comes to electrification, or what sectors have the priority?
I think ideally, yes, we should be able to decide who should have access, and in case there are shortages of electricity, there needs to be priority. However, I think that the challenge will be to provide electricity to everyone and to all usages. And indeed, if we take artificial intelligence, the reality is that electricity use will continue to increase worldwide. Last year, electricity use increased by about 2.5%, But the big news, and I think that was underreported, is that all of that increase in electricity consumption last year was completely absorbed by low carbon energies, by renewables and nuclear. This is the first time this has happened outside of COVID, which means that fossil fuel production for electricity has been scaled down for the first time outside of COVID. And that's a major turning point, I think, in the electricity transition.
Yeah, artificial intelligence, the topic of the Pope's first encyclical this week. And even though he worried more about things like deregulation, weaponization of AI, disruption to the labor market, he more broadly emphasized that machines have to serve humanity, not the other way around.
Let's not fear artificial intelligence, but constantly keep the question of the human in play. We cannot be careless with our most powerful technical instruments.
Stéphane Écoute, is innovation, technology, going to come to the aid of humanity in tackling the climate crisis, or is it going to be the undoing of it?
I mean, of course, it is first of all, we see a lot of technologies that are very important, that are necessary. We cannot solve the climate crisis and other ecological crises without technology. I think that is very important to recognize. We have to support a certain set of technologies, and we know more or less which they are. We can disagree about one or two of them, but more or less we know that. I think what is more important is that we also have to take into account that the economics, the political economy of phasing in new technologies is not always the same as phasing out the old ones. So there are real conflicts ahead, already beginning with certain jobs that will disappear, that will be requalified, with certain forms of life that have developed out of the fossil production age. That will have to be abandoned. We have to change infrastructures. That's why we need also the state. We have to overcome resistance. And so I think what is insidious perhaps in this technology will solve us narrative is not so much that it underestimates perhaps the scale of the problem, it does, but also that it politically disarms our societies. So the problem with this techno-optimism is political. We have to understand the problems that lie ahead. We have to understand that automatically innovation, markets and electrification will not suffice, and that the collective efforts that will be demanded are much larger. And I think it is important to prepare societies on this, because we have seen in other instances, we have seen briefly during COVID, but also in the 70s during the oil crisis, we have seen during war times, and I don't wish a war economy, but still that populations, when they understand that things are at stake, are willing to make efforts. But for that to happen, they have to be prepared, and then the measures taken have to be perceived as just and as not detrimental to already vulnerable groups. And I think that is really the core. So I think technology is important, but technology will not solve it alone.
All right, Stéphane Écoute, priming the pump for a conversation on technology, ecology, and democracy. We'll hope to have that one soon and have you back. Stéphane Écoute, thank you so much for being with us. From Hamburg, I want to thank Anna Creti, François Gémen, Philippe Charles. Thank you for being with us here in the France 24 debate.